The woman's fingers tightened around her phone, her knuckles turning white as she spoke urgently to the 911 operator. "I'm telling you, this black kid is causing trouble." Her voice rose with each word, conviction evident in her tone, prejudice fueling every syllable. The teenager in question stood nearby, unaware of the brewing storm that had begun to swirl around him. A black SUV screeched to a halt, drawing all eyes in the park. The city's mayor, Vanessa Carter, emerged, her face masked with controlled fury. The accusing woman's mouth fell open, recognition dawning slowly, her certainty crumbling under the weight of her mistake. The mayor's voice cut through the tension. Quiet but steely, each word deliberate. "That troublemaker you're reporting," she paused, her eyes fixed on the woman, "is my son." In that moment, the accuser's bravado disintegrated, replaced with the dawning realization of the gravity of her actions, a grave mistake that would ripple far beyond this quiet street corner. Jeremiah leaned against an oak tree, enjoying the late afternoon sun in Lincoln Park. He breathed in deeply, savoring the scent of freshly cut grass, the blooming flowers, and the warmth of the sun on his skin. His mother had promised to pick him up soon, and he was content to wait, lost in his thoughts. The world around him was peaceful, and he allowed himself to feel at ease, even as a prickling sensation formed at the back of his neck, pulling him from his reverie. He opened his eyes, scanning the park until his gaze landed on a middle-aged white woman seated on a nearby bench. Her name, he would later learn, was Susan. She was staring at him, her lips pressed into a tight, thin line, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. Jeremiah tried to shake off the unease, but her gaze was unrelenting. Susan rose from the bench, her movements stiff, her expression a mask of determination. She approached Jeremiah, her footsteps deliberate, her voice sharp, accusatory. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her eyes narrowing further. "This is a family park, not a place for troublemakers. Leave now, or I'll call the police." The implication in her words stung. Jeremiah felt a mix of confusion, frustration, and rising anger. He was here, just like everyone else, enjoying a public space. "Ma'am, I'm not causing any trouble," he said, struggling to keep his voice calm and respectful. "I'm just waiting for my mom. I have every right to be here." Susan's face flushed with anger. Her lips pursed, and without another word, she reached into her purse, her fingers trembling as she pulled out her phone. Jeremiah's eyes widened in disbelief. He stood up slowly, his hands held out in a placating gesture. "Please, there's no need for that," he pleaded, fear creeping into his voice. "I'm telling you the truth. My mom will be here any minute." But Susan had already made up her mind. With a grim look of satisfaction, she dialed 911, her eyes never leaving Jeremiah's face. "Hello, yes, I'd like to report a suspicious teenager in Lincoln Park," she said into the phone, her voice carrying clearly in the quiet afternoon air. Jeremiah stood rooted to the spot, a cold wave of dread washing over him. He watched as Susan spoke to the dispatcher, painting him as a threat. He felt a profound sense of injustice settle deep in his chest. He was being criminalized for simply existing, for being present in a public space while black. He was just a kid waiting for his mom, and yet here he was seen as a danger, a threat, simply because of the color of his skin. The reality of the situation hit him hard. He had seen this play out before in news stories, in viral videos, and now it was his turn. In a matter of minutes, the police would arrive, and Jeremiah knew all too well how quickly encounters like this could turn dangerous for young black men like himself. He prayed silently that his mother would arrive soon, even as he tried to steel himself for what was to come. The screech of tires pierced the air. 2 police cruisers rolled to a stop, their lights flashing, painting the park in alternating shades of red and blue. Jeremiah's heart pounded, a chill running down his spine as he watched the officers approach. He'd seen countless videos of similar encounters gone wrong, and now he found himself at the center of one. The officers walked toward them with measured steps, their eyes scanning the scene, assessing the situation. Jeremiah stood perfectly still, his hands visible at his sides, his mother's voice echoing in his mind. Lessons she'd given him on how to interact with police, how to stay safe. "What's the problem here?" the taller officer asked, his gaze shifting between Jeremiah and Susan. Susan stepped forward, her words tumbling out. "This young man has been loitering for hours," she said, her voice laced with disdain. "He refused to leave when I asked. I'm concerned for the safety of the families here." Jeremiah felt frustration well up inside him, a surge of anger at Susan's distorted version of the truth. He opened his mouth to speak, to defend himself, but the second officer cut him off. "We'll get to you in a moment, son," he said, his tone making it clear that Jeremiah's side of the story was secondary. The officers questioned Susan, nodding as she embellished her account. With each passing moment, Jeremiah could feel the situation slipping further and further out of his control. When they finally turned to him, their expressions were guarded. "All right, young man," the first officer said, "explain yourself. What are you doing here?" Jeremiah took a deep breath. "I was just waiting for my mom to pick me up," he explained, fighting to keep his voice steady. "I come here often. I wasn't bothering anyone." The officers exchanged a glance. "Do you have any ID?" the second officer asked, his hand resting on his belt. "No, sir," Jeremiah replied, aware of how suspicious this must sound. "I'm only 14. I don't have a driver's license." As the questioning continued, Jeremiah struggled to articulate his side of the story. The officers' skeptical tone, their rapid-fire questions, it was overwhelming. He could feel the situation escalating, the officer's posture becoming more rigid. A small crowd had gathered, several onlookers holding up their phones, recording. Jeremiah's anxiety grew, knowing that this humiliating moment could end up on social media for all to see. Just as the situation seemed poised to worsen, a low rumble of an approaching vehicle caught everyone's attention. A sleek black SUV pulled up to the park entrance. The officer's demeanor shifted instantly as the driver's door opened. Their eyes widened in recognition, and Jeremiah felt a rush of relief wash over him. His mother had arrived. Mayor Vanessa Carter stepped out of the SUV, her presence commanding immediate attention. The officers straightened, their confidence faltering. Susan's mouth fell open in shock, the realization of her mistake dawning on her face. The tension in the air crackled as everyone understood that this confrontation was about to take a dramatic turn. The park fell silent as Mayor Carter approached the gathering, her eyes fixed on her son. Jeremiah's shoulders sagged with relief, but the tension in his mother's jaw told him that this was far from over. "What's going on here?" Mayor Carter's voice cut through the silence, each word crisp and measured. The officers snapped to attention, their earlier confidence evaporating. Susan's accusatory demeanor crumbled under the mayor's steely gaze. Mayor Carter surveyed the scene, the police cruisers, the crowd, her son's rigid posture. "I'd like an explanation," she said, her voice sharp. "Why are my officers questioning my son in a public park?" The taller officer cleared his throat, his authority replaced with hesitation. "Ma'am, we received a call about a suspicious individual," he said, his voice trailing off. "Suspicious?" Mayor Carter interrupted, her eyebrow arching. "What exactly made my son suspicious?" Susan stepped forward, her voice trembling. "He was just hanging around for hours, and I thought—" "You thought what exactly?" Mayor Carter's voice was quiet but razor-sharp. "That a black teenager in a public park must be up to no good?" Susan's face flushed, her certainty dissolving under the weight of the mayor's words. Mayor Carter turned back to the officers, her expression a mixture of disappointment and determination. Gentlemen, this situation highlights a critical issue. Did you consider the possibility of bias in the call? Did you approach my son with the same presumption of innocence you'd give any other citizens? The silence that followed was deafening. Mayor Carter placed a protective hand on Jeremiah's shoulder, her voice softening. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" Jeremiah nodded, the knot in his chest finally loosening. "I'm okay, Mom," he said, his voice steady despite the lingering fear. Mayor Carter addressed the group, her expression resolute. This incident underscores the need for comprehensive anti-bias training in our police force and our community, she said, her gaze sweeping over the gathered crowd. No child should feel criminalized for existing in public spaces. She fixed Susan with a stern look. "I hope this serves as a wake-up call. Your unfounded suspicions could have had serious consequences. We must all examine our biases and work to create a community where everyone feels safe and welcome." As the mayor's words sank in, the atmosphere in the park shifted. The officers, visibly chastened, stepped back from Jeremiah. Susan mumbled an apology, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Mayor Carter addressed the crowd once more. "Let this be a lesson. We must do better, and it starts with each of us confronting our own biases and standing up against injustice." With that, she gently guided Jeremiah toward their SUV, leaving behind a park full of people with much to contemplate. As they walked away, Jeremiah felt a mix of relief and pride. His mother's intervention had not only protected him, but might have sparked the change their community so desperately needed. The incident in the park had concluded, but its impact reverberated through the community. Mayor Vanessa Carter knew this moment could either deepen divisions or spark meaningful change. With Jeremiah at her side, she stepped forward to address the growing crowd. "What we've witnessed today," she began, her voice carrying across the park, "is a symptom of a pervasive problem in our society: racial bias." The crowd fell silent, absorbing her words. "Too often, we allow unfounded fears to dictate our actions with devastating consequences for innocent people," she continued. Jeremiah, still visibly shaken, found the strength to speak. "I was just sitting here, enjoying the day," he said, his voice gaining resolve. "In minutes, I went from feeling safe to feeling like a criminal. It's not right." The rawness of Jeremiah's words resonated with many in the crowd. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathered onlookers, punctuated by nods of understanding. Susan, the woman who had called the police, stepped forward, her face flushed with embarrassment. "I didn't mean any harm," she admitted. "I was just trying to keep the park safe." Mayor Carter's eyes narrowed. "The point is, ma'am, that it shouldn't matter whose son he is. Every person deserves to exist in public spaces without being criminalized," she said firmly. She turned back to the crowd. "This incident has made it clear that we need to do more. Today, I'm announcing the implementation of comprehensive anti-bias training for our police force and city employees." The announcement elicited mixed reactions. Some nodded approvingly, while others exchanged skeptical glances. A man near the front called out, "How will this training actually change things?" Mayor Carter acknowledged the question. "Anti-bias training isn't a magic solution," she said, "but it's a crucial first step in raising awareness and providing our public servants with tools to recognize and counteract their own biases. This incident will serve as a real-world example of how quickly assumptions can escalate into dangerous situations." As the crowd continued to debate, Mayor Carter turned to Jeremiah. In a quiet moment, she pulled him into a gentle hug. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. You handled this with more grace than anyone should have to. Jeremiah leaned into his mother's embrace, a mix of exhaustion and relief washing over him. Do you think things can change? He asked softly. Mayor Carter met her son's eyes. Change is never easy, she said firmly. But moments like these can be the spark that ignites real progress. We just have to be brave enough to keep the conversation going. As they made their way back to the SUV, leaving behind a park buzzing with intense discussions, it was clear that the day's events had struck a chord. The incident had forced the community to confront the reality of racial profiling head-on, and the conversations that followed would echo through City Hall, police precincts, and dinner tables across the city for weeks to come. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across Lincoln Park, the impact of that fateful afternoon continued to resonate. Mayor Carter's words echoed in the minds of those who had witnessed the confrontation, exposing the raw nerves of racial tension that still pulsed beneath the surface of their community. In the days that followed, conversations sparked across the city. People grappled with uncomfortable truths about their own biases, re-examining interactions they had once dismissed as harmless. The local newspaper explored the roots of racial profiling, while community leaders organized town halls to address the issue head-on. Jeremiah, still processing the weight of his experience, found an unexpected ally in his school's debate club. As he shared his story, his classmates listened with rapt attention, their eyes widening as they realized the gravity of what he had endured. It was a stark reminder that the fight against prejudice was far from over, even in their seemingly progressive town. Mayor Carter pushed forward with plans for comprehensive anti-bias training, facing pushback, but standing firm in her conviction. We cannot afford to be complacent, she repeated in interviews and council meetings. Every unjust interaction chips away at the foundation of trust our community is built upon. As weeks passed, small changes began to take root. Police officers engaged in more community outreach programs, fostering dialogue and understanding. Local businesses displayed signs of inclusivity, and a new mural bloomed in Lincoln Park, celebrating the city's diversity. Civil rights leader James Harris's words resonated deeply. There are thousands of black men sitting in prison who have been falsely accused. That's why we have to address incidents like this. Now, the incident in Lincoln Park had been a wake-up call, challenging everyone to examine their own biases and actively work toward creating a more just society. The path forward was not easy, but it was necessary. Actions in the face of prejudice shape the world we live in, and silence was no longer an option. Join our community of people who believe in justice, empathy, and powerful storytelling by subscribing. You're not just watching, you're part of a movement that values real stories and change. Add us to your daily routine and make every story count. Subscribe and join us each day for stories that make an impact.